me just ask the first question then. From what I understand, this bill right now, as it stands, is about 1,000 pages. I imagine you haven't had a chance to read all of it, and there are talks about changes going on. I know Lindsey Graham had a big switch he wanted to do. Of what you know of this bill right now, is this something that you could, in principle, support?
Well, in principle, yes, because we have a common goal here of making sure that people are getting taken care of. That is, everyday folks who suddenly had their job stopped or taken away from them, small business owners that have had their world turned upside down, and frankly, all of us as consumers of mortgages and credit card debt and car loans and student loans and those kinds of things. We've seen the markets, those credit markets, freeze up. So we've got to get some real relief on all of those levels.
What red flags have you seen in the bill so far that you want to see addressed before you could full-throated support it?
Yeah, lots of questions about the details, how things would function. I'm wanting to make sure that Nancy Pelosi's Green New Deal sections aren't a part of this. I don't think that has anything to do with the as being a proper part of what this bill should be. We need to be dealing with COVID and the fallout in the healthcare field, as well as the economic side of it. And we shouldn't be, loading up election revisions and nationalizing elections and doing all the other stuff that originally the speaker had proposed in the House. So it sounds like the Senate bill is much closer to what the original version was back 3 days ago. So I'm not quite sure I understand the holdup and whether it was worth it or not. But those are the kinds of things I'm going to be looking for. And if those are clear, and we're making sure that the proposed systems of how this is going to work for Treasury and the Federal Reserve for the larger lending programs, with the SBA for those smaller lending programs, how those are going to work, how we work, make sure that whether it's family medical leave and sick leave and those things for folks that are finding themselves in need of tapping into those programs, how that's all going to function. So it's really about details right now. And honestly, the size is concerning, should be concerning to anybody, just because of the amount of money that's being spent here. We're talking about 1/10 of the entire GDP of the U.S. Economy, and we're doing it in one bill. And that would make me concerned about doing that without going to Washington to vote on it, to actually vote on it. That would be bothersome.
Tangentially, not necessarily about the bill specifically, but the president seems as though he wants to reopen the country business as normal by Easter. Are you comfortable with that?
It depends on where we are in the curve and where we're seeing. And there may be some regions and areas where that might make some sense. Certainly, it's not going to make sense in New York. It may not make sense in Southeast Michigan, as we're seeing that as sort of an emerging hotspot. So I think it needs to be viewed within context.
Okay, the stimulus bill and checks to Americans. People are kind of conflating these a little bit when, in a lot of ways, they are very separate things. The direct checks to Americans, and I'm seeing anywhere from $12.50 on up, depending upon how much you make. Are you comfortable with those direct checks going to Americans? Is that something you're behind right now?
Yeah, I don't have a huge problem with that. What we don't want to see is people just using that as savings, right? And that had happened after 9/11. Big checks went out, and they discovered that they weren't actually, people weren't spending it at the level that they thought was going to happen. But certainly, you've got a credit crunch, not only for businesses, but for us as individuals, right? Everyone's trying to figure out how they add to their grocery bill right now. And obviously entertainment budgets might be a little different for us all as families, but there's certainly some additional costs here that we're all experiencing the idea is to get some cash into people's hands, let them shop. And whether it's for those basics or whether it's for some of those other things that they're going to need as we're sort of doing this voluntary set aside of our economy, and people are sitting home. So I don't have a problem with that direct check.
Hypotheticals are tough, but I'm going to ask you, if this continues for a couple of months, 2 or 3 months, do these checks need to go out more than once?
Well, my understanding is the plan as it sits, it looks like there will be 2 phases of that. So that's one of the details I'm asking about as well, as
Yeah.
looking as this is going to be a one-time or whether there's actually 2 checks.
And this is obviously very fluid right now. We've never seen anything like this. So, um, Congressman, that's about all I got. Unless there's something else that you want to that you want to bring up, that you want to mention, whether it be policy wise or anything else.
Yeah. One big difference, Nick, and I've been talking about this in virtually every interview that I've done. One big difference between this economic crisis and the '08 economic crisis is that in '08, that was a house of cards that was built on illegal activities. And once that house of cards was exposed, you saw the economy collapse, and it started with housing. This is very different. We've got a strong economy, a strong banking system, a strong mortgage system. Yet we are now voluntarily setting that aside and telling businesses that they need to shut down, that they need to change activities. And so as we're going in this, people have to look at this and say, okay, we're taking a robust economy, we're hitting the pause button here. And this is going to be expensive, but it is, I think, the right thing to do as far as the healthcare side of our country, so that ultimately we can return to a much more robust and healthy economy again. But we're making sure that the proper checks are in place, that the proper oversight is in place. But we've got to get real relief to everyday people, to small business owners, and then also to those credit markets, so that mortgages and car loans and student loans and all those things can be utilized by all of us. So that's critical that we go ahead with this.
Real quick, I'm going to follow up, since you mentioned '08 and the discrepancy between then and now. Is that why you're seeing more Republicans in favor of these direct payments and stimulus, when in '08 they were really fighting even President Bush's bailout and then the stimulus packages that President Obama put forward? Is that why you think there's a difference?
Yeah, well, you used the proper word attached to '08, which is bailout. You saw bank bailouts. You saw bailouts of particular industries. These are loans that are going into any of these areas. It's really the federal government's acting as a backstop, and making sure that we are properly altering and refining bank rules to make sure that they're able to lend money out to people. So there's no bailouts in this. Again, because this is voluntary, where the government's coming in and saying, "Hey, wait a minute, you can't do business this way," and it's almost like a takings issue, really, where you've got government coming in and dictating the business practices. So yeah, this is very different than the '08 bailouts. This is really making sure that credit is available, and that we've got an economy that was healthy and robust, is able to hit the pause button and become healthy and robust again.